Hi everyone, this is William Lee, and I'm back with my series Life on the Magic Mountain. And the video today is it's not one of the 11 episodes that I recorded at Schatzalp. I'm not at Schatzalp at the moment, but I want to, and it's not doing another subchapter of the Magic Mountain, but it's a little video about a book that would not have come into existence if it was not for the Magic Mountain, and a book that has a very interesting history, and you could say it's part of the overall Magic Mountain phenomena in Davos, and I'm borrowing that phrase, Magic Mountain phenomena, from Grand Duke Dmitri, who you know about if you've been watching this series of visitors. So the book is Der Zauberlehrling, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, by Erich Kästner. And if you want to look the book up online, you need to put in not just Zauberlehrling, but Erich Kästner, because it's such a famous title that you'll just come up with endless references to Goethe's work, and so you'll get nowhere unless you put in Kästner's name. So for those of you who are English speakers, it's a umlaut, so it isn't pronounced Kästner. Okay, so this book was published in 1936, so 3 years before Dmitri arrived in Davos and slightly in advance of the Second World War, and so it does belong to the Sanatorium era, and it came out 12 years. It was published 12 years after the Magic Mountain, so we'll have to wait 12 years for the anniversary of Der Zauberlehrling, which I don't think will probably be as big a deal as this year's anniversary of the Magic Mountain. So, unfortunately, this book is not widely known, and in fact, this new edition of the book is, I think, the only one, and it has not been translated into other languages. As far as I know, it definitely hasn't been translated into English. So I'm going to have to sort of offer you some cobbled together translations of a few sections that I want to quote today, and also try to pronounce the German for those of you who are German speakers, and I certainly encourage you to get the book yourself. If you're like me, if you're sort of an intermediate German speaker, then go ahead and dive into the book. It's not like trying to read the Magic Mountain. It's a real it's real literature, I would say. I mean, it's comic literature, but it is relatively simple to read, and it's short. It's only 129 pages in this edition. So I will begin by quoting from Wikipedia. The book actually has its own entry in Wikipedia. So this is a quote. Kästner began working on The Sorcerer's Apprentice when the Davos tourist office invited him to give a lecture. The hosts asked for a cheerful novel about the city, as The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann had brought the place into disrepute. Davos is therefore the setting for most of the action in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It is indeed. There are brief scenes, one in Munich, and then a dream scene that takes place in ancient Greece, or on Mount Olympus in ancient Greek setting. So, yeah. So, as any of you know who are into the Magic Mountain, after it was published in 1924, Thomas Mann became very much persona non grata in Davos, because the novel was considered to be largely negative in relation to Davos itself and to the sanatorium industry, you could say, and it's intimated that many of the doctors were charlatans and so on and so forth. And yeah, I don't know, maybe some of them were. But at any rate, of course, now the book is ironically very much celebrated in Davos. But at that time, in the 1930s, people there were still sort of licking their wounds from the damage that they believed had been inflicted on the town by the Magic Mountain. And so apparently Kästner came to Davos to give a lecture, and then was asked by sort of the city fathers to please write something that will be a little bit of a counterpart to the Magic Mountain, and to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, the Magic Mountain is an 800-page book. This is a 129-page book. So that makes a big difference, for one thing. But yeah, there are certain parallels. The protagonist of the novel, who's Alphonse Mintzlaff, and he is an academic. He's quite a young man. I think he's 30, so a little older than Hans Castorp. But he is a professor specializing in the history and theory of humor. And so he would be our parallel character to Hans Castorp. And like Hans Castorp, he is a little bit adrift at this stage in his life as he's going to Davos. He's, like Kästner himself, he's been asked to give a lecture in Davos, so he's going there for that reason. And his life isn't going particularly well at that time, and he's kind of trying to figure out who he is. So in that respect, he is a counterpart to Hans Castorp. So when he stops in Munich en route to Davos, he meets a man who introduces himself as Baron Lamotte, although he freely admits that that's a pseudonym. And the Baron ends up becoming a very important mentor to Professor Mintzlaff. And so he would be along the lines of Sedembrini in the Magic Mountain. Okay, and then when they get to Davos, there's this very mysterious, exotic woman by the name of Juana Fernandez. So she would be the Frau Schott character, but under very different circumstances. And then there is another woman, delightful character, and she is sort of former girlfriend of Mintzlaff's. So they have a pre-existing relationship, and they are quite friendly to each other in Davos and trying to rebuild their relationship. And she goes by the unusual name of Hallo, Hallo, and there's a whole backstory about how she came to have that strange nickname, but that's the name that is used in the novel. And then the antagonist in the novel, which you don't so much have in the Magic Mountain, is Prince Friedrich the 47th von Ofludingen, which I believe is a real place. So a comic character, but also a bit of a villain. And as I said, this is a comic novel. So those are the parallels, basically, to the Magic Mountain. And I would actually parallel Der Zauberlehrling to another book that was finished, I believe, in 1939, but it wasn't published until the 1960s because it was banned in Soviet Russia. And that is the very famous novel by Mikhail Bulgakov called The Master and Margarita. So in The Master and Margarita, the devil comes to Moscow and wreaks havoc in a more or less benign way. So I can tell you in advance that Baron Lamotte is not the devil. Baron Lamotte, like Professor Voland in The Magic Mountain, is a character that you're left guessing, who is this man? He does have some superhuman talents and abilities, and he invites Mintzlaff to make 3 guesses a day as to who he actually is, and we do end up finding out who he is about halfway through the novel. But it's fun to wonder and to guess as you begin to read the novel. The reader is in the same position as Professor Mintzlaff, trying to guess who Baron Lamont actually is. So it really interests me very much that Der Zauberlehrling and The Master and Margarita were written at the same time. But Kästner could have had no inkling about the Magic Mountain about The Master and Margarita, because of the fact that it wasn't published. It was a manuscript in Russia. It wasn't published. And so you can't say that, and it was and it wasn't even finished until after Der Zauberlehrling had already been published. So you can't say that there was any sort of that there was any sort of inspiration that Kästner had from the Magic Mountain. I suppose Bulgakov might have had some inspiration from Der Zauberlehrling, but I feel about 99.9% sure that Bulgakov probably never heard of the book. So that's just a point of interest, and if there are any of you who are literature scholars out there, I would love to hear from you about what you think about that. So now, looking at Der Zauberlehrling itself, I would describe it as a novel. It's a humorous novel. It's written as a humorous novel, and it is indeed very funny. It's successful in that respect. It's also quite accurate in its depiction of Davos at that time. So even if you're not interested in comic novels, if you're just a resident of Davos or someone like myself who loves Davos, read it, because it is such an interesting and, as I say, I think also accurate depiction of Davos. And if you've been following my comments on Grand Duke Dmitri, this will really help you sort of envision what life was like at that time. So unlike The Magic Mountain, it's not a sanatorium novel. None of the characters have anything to do with the sanatoriums. They have more to do with the tourists in town and indulge in a little winter sport. And so, but still, even if your interest is the sanatoriums, as it is mine, you're still going to find it very helpful in envisioning Davos at that time. So it's also extremely insightful. It has that in common with The Magic Mountain, that it offers some real philosophical gems, although obviously in a 129-page novel, the author is not having prolonged dialogues and musings like Thomas Mann can have in his 800-plus word novel. So the philosophical musings in Der Zauberlehrling are very succinct, but very insightful. So reading along, I would suddenly be stopped and very intrigued by these ideas that I wanted to think about. And so I'll only quote one of those. In German, it's werden Sie, was Sie sind. So become what you are. Not be what you are, but become. And I think that makes all the difference, because we all have an authentic self that has been more or less repressed because of the circumstances of life, but we can work on becoming that authentic self. So for me, it's more helpful than just saying, be who you are. You know, it's going to be a process. So I love that. And as for the plot of the book, so Alphonse Mintzlaff comes to town. He's been invited by the tourist office and the art society to give a lecture, a serious lecture, but on the topic of humor. And it will be given in the Kurhal. And he comes to town and he discovers, and on the train, so on the train, he'd met Lamont in Munich, and Lamont is basically barging into Mintzlaff's train compartment and sort of imposing himself on him at that stage. They take the train together to Davos, and they end up spending the whole novel together, and it turns into a real friendship and a real mentorship on Lamont's part. And you could say, if you refer to the title, that Lamont is would be the sorcerer to whom Menslav is the sorcerer's apprentice. Okay, so they discover when they arrive in Davos, they both discover to their surprise that there is an imposter in town who's pretending to be Menslav and who has arranged to give the lecture, who has told the organizers of the lecture that he needs to give it earlier than the original invitation had specified, and they go along with it. So everything culminates at the end of the novel in this lecture where Alphonse Menslav, now using a pseudonym, is present while this Prince Friedrich, who is pretending to be Alphonse Menslav, is there to give the lecture. And the novel, I must say, ends quite abruptly because it wasn't actually finished. So fortunately, you have the culmination, you have the denouement. The only thing is missing is that it would be fun to know what happened immediately after that and how the characters ended up parting ways and what their further relationships were going to be like. But for whatever reason, Kästner didn't have a chance to finish it, but I've been told that the City Fathers in Davos asked if it could be published anyway, and he agreed to that because, you do have this big climax that you've been waiting for as you've been reading through the novel. Okay, so that is the plot. And unlike Thomas Mann, who only uses the actual name for a few of the places in the Magic Mountain, Menslav uses real names. So places that are mentioned in the novel are the Hotel Belvedere and the Kurhaus, which is now the Hotel Europe. Both of those play a prominent role because these are where the big events in the novel take place. Both the nightlife that Menslav and Lamont enjoy for a while, and of course the big lecture, are in those two places. So Schatzalp is mentioned by name, the Hotel Victoria, which is where Menslav ends up staying, and the Pension Edelweiss, which is where Hallo is staying. And that made me smile because the first place that I stayed before I'd gone up to Schatzalp in 1993 on my first trip to Davos was at the Edelweiss. Okay, so I have some quotes from the novel that I love. I hope I'm not using too many. And during the novel, like Hans Castorp, Menslav has a dream in which he's in a Greek setting, and in his case, Mount Olympus with the gods, and the goddess Hera, during this dream, asks the god Hermes, her stepson, she asks, "Wo liegt dieses Davos eigentlich?" So where exactly is this Davos? So she's heard about Davos. Within the dream, she's heard about Davos, and she asks Hermes to tell her where Davos is, and Hermes says, "Gen Abend auf halben Weg zu den Säulen des Herakles, hoch oben in einem Gebirge." I hope I wrote that down right and wasn't too awful with my pronunciation. I have a feeling I was. So the directions to Davos, hilarious. Go halfway to the Pillars of Hercules, and yeah, so I love that line. So the next quote that I have, so Menslav gets caught out after spending the night in Hallo's hotel room. So he finds himself in the morning in a predicament. And the quote is, "It's no fun to cross an international winter sports venue in broad daylight in a tuxedo and patent leather shoes. This kind of thing borders on running the gauntlet. So es ist kein ausgemachtes Vergnügen, einen internationalen Wintersportplatz am helllichten Tag in Smoking und Lackschuhen zu durchqueren. dergleichen grenzt an Spießrutenlaufen. So I can just picture that in Davos. I can just picture him running across Promenade in the early morning, wearing his smoking and his patent leather shoes. And here we're not identifying Davos as a sanatorium town. We are identifying it as an international winter sport resort, which indeed it was. All right, so then after getting settled in Davos, he decides to take a hike one morning. I think Lamont has gone to St. Moritz, or no, but he's elsewhere at any rate. And Mintzlaff decides to take a hike, and of course the most beautiful hike, as we all know, is up to Schatzalp, so that is where he goes. And what do I have? So he's hiking up in an area where people were used to rushing uphill on trains, so funiculars, and downhill on skis. The few walkers he met gave the impression that they were remnants that had secretly escaped from museums. So Davos in 1936, you have this sort of jet set element, winter sport element, skiers, that sort of thing. And so instead of hiking, they're all taking the funicular up to Schatzalp and then the ski lift, and they're skiing. And so at this particular time, he doesn't encounter many walkers like himself on the path up, which would now be the Eichhornlieweg. Okay, so in German, die wenigen Spaziergänger, denen begegnete, machten in einer Gegend, wo man gewohnt war, mit Bahnen bergauf und auf Brettern bergab zu sausen, den Eindruck, als seien sie aus Museen heimlich entwichene Restbestände. So they were escapees from a museum, and if you go to Davos nowadays, you will find that the hiking trail up to Schatzalp is very popular, very popular. And you'll meet lots of people, and if you're there in the summer or spring, you're going to find all these little squirrels that are practically tame, because there are so many hikers who give them little treats along the way, nuts and dried fruit and that sort of thing. Okay, so once he gets up to Schatzalp, behind Schatzalp there were still signposts, but no more paths. And when he had sunk a few meters deep in the snow, he stopped the inhospitable undertaking, turned around, and sat down in front of a small, cozy inn that clung to the mountainside. So this is the Strela Inn, which is a nice walk up beyond Schatzalp. And when you get up to Schatzalp itself, you're going to find lots of hiking trails. But he has gone up through the snow, so he actually sinks into the snow and made his way up to the Strela Inn, and he decides to stop there. So, hinter der Schatzalp gab es zwar noch Wegweiser, aber keine Wege mehr. Und als Mintzlaff einige Male metertief im Schnee eingesunken war, brach das unwirtliche Unternehmen ab, kehrte und setzte sich vor ein kleines, anheimelndes Wirtshaus, das am Burghang klebte. So the Strela Inn is still there, and it is still a wonderful place to go and have a beer in the summer or something nice and warm in the winter and enjoy the beautiful view. Okay, so while he's there, he watches the skiers coming down toward Schatzalp, and it's quite interesting because they are braking as they come to Schatzalp, and they're coming down so fast that he catches his breath watching, in particular, one of them, whether he's going to brake before he actually runs into Schatzalp, into the building. And then he makes this very interesting observation, or Lamont does, who has joined him up there. Anyone who broke a leg here in the highest districts was immediately tobogganed to the hospital on medical sledges by staff specially employed for this purpose. So nowadays, if you broke a leg up there, you would be taken down by helicopter. But back then, apparently, there were these medical sledges or sleds or toboggans that they would take injured people down on. And I find that so interesting because I myself have expressed skepticism about the claim made by Joachim Simpson in The Magic Mountain that Schatzalp Sanatorium, when someone died, would send the body down to Davos, not on the funicular, but on a toboggan or a bobsled. And maybe, I mean, I don't know. I guess this is pointing a little bit in that direction, that they had that they had the capacity to take people with broken legs down. They had these medical sledges, they existed, and they would use them for injured people. Well, why not for a body then? But that is still unconfirmed. So do read the Zauberlehrling if you possibly can, and if, like me, your German is sort of in an intermediate stage, then I would still encourage you to give it a try. I managed to get through it. It wasn't the case that, sorry, I just noticed a bad angle there. It wasn't the case that I had to stop every few minutes and look things up. It's a serious and a deep book, despite being comic, but it is not one like Mann's Magic Mountain that uses really complicated sentence structures. So you can do it. All right, so thank you for watching, and I am also going to be posting the third installment in the series Life on the Magic Mountain. I'm going to do that today, so I hope you'll watch. All right, bye.